And lo, it shall pass that the reviewer can't get off level 1, and he shall not care for the game, or want to play it for more than 20 minutes. But lo, he shall be fearful of the software company dropping advertising and missing him off the free crate of beer list at Christmas, and he shall tremble and quake mightily, as all rival mags have given it a high score. So, he shall give it a score low enough to dissuade potential buyers, yet high enough to pacify the software people. And that score shall be the number of the beast, and it shall be 73%.
Today's defendant, Mean Machines, Issue 23, August 1992. The game, Castelian. Court is in session. You've probably not heard of Castelian. I certainly hadn't. It's a NES game by Bit Studios for Triffix, who, chances are, you've also never heard of, from towards the later era of the system's UK commercial lifespan. So why am I showing you what is very clearly a Commodore 64 game? As you can tell, by it being of the opinion that colours should be seen and not heard. Well, this is Nebulous, by John M. Phillips for Hewson Consultants, and actually, it's the same game. It's also been known on occasions as Subline, Tower Toppler, and Cairo Chanland. You'd think it was on the run from something, but the original computer versions were incredibly well regarded. This Commodore 64 version won a Golden Joystick Award. Zap gave it a gold medal, and it made its way well into the upper reaches of the top 100 of both Your Sinclair and Amiga Power. It also made its way to the CPC, ST, Archimedes, Atari 7800 and Game Boy over the years as well. So okay, it's not come out of actual nowhere. The immediate issue that comes to mind is, this was a game that was released in 1987 for less than a tenner, on machines with similar capabilities to the NES. It's now 1992, and they're asking a steep, even for console, £36 for it. It's going to have to justify being 10 times the price of the computer versions on their budget re-releases, the ravages of time, and be a stonking conversion in order to justify a decent score here. Time to take a look at the evidence. Well, conclusion 1, this really is the same game. I'll tell you now, it has the same 8 towers as the C64 version, laid out in the same order with the same basic gameplay. There's some graphical improvements. The main sprite stands out better, for instance, and some of the enemies have had a minor overhaul. The rest is as is. Although that's not the worst thing. Nebulous was one of the first games to fake 3D in this fashion, by keeping the character static and rotating the player through a circular level. It's a pretty convincing effect on the C64, and that's intact here. That said, it looks every inch its age in general, as we'll see later. The aim remains the same. Get to the top of those towers by walking left and right, riding lifts, and firing what appears to be some kind of snot ball. And, just occasionally, jumping. Black mark number 1 against this game. The C64 one is a one-button joystick-only game. You shoot by pressing fire. You jump by pressing fire and a direction. Not ideal, and perhaps it would have been better to use up, but have it be contextual to you being on a lift as to what it did. Nonetheless, I'll allow it. There were certainly bigger crimes on the 8-bit micros. Thankfully, the NES has a 2-button controller. You fire by pushing A here. You jump by holding a direction and A. It's like they started reading the NES controller and got bored halfway. Poor little B there is sat doing absolutely nothing for anyone. If it were the game on trial rather than the review, I'd already be warming up the electric chair and flexing my handle-pulling hand. That's not the only place difficulty comes from either. Some of it is deliberate. The gun is apparently firing snowballs rather than snot, which makes even less sense. And being a weak weapon like that, only the flashing blocks and the bouncing balls can actually be destroyed. You can briefly freeze the rolling silver balls with it, but everything else will completely ignore you. It's basically the weapon equivalent of trying to get served at a student bar. If you get hit by something, you'll tumble down a couple of levels, and hopefully there'll be some terrain there to catch you. If you fall all the way down to the sea, then you die, and lose one of your very small number of lives. If all that didn't make it difficult enough, there's also a time limit, numbering just 100 seconds on this tower. Eagle-eyed viewers will notice I'd sneakily cheated my way to removing that on the C64 one, in an effort to give myself time to look around, but that's not an option available to you on the NES. Worse still, there is no save game system of any type on the US and European version. If you lose all your lives on Tower 7, then congratulations, you're making your way through the whole thing again from the first one. When they reworked the game's graphics and released it in Japan as Kairo-chan Land, based on a Japanese cereal mascot, they added a password system. Think about this for a second. The Japanese thought the difficulty on this game was too hardcore, and this is the country that invented Takeshi's Castle. It's not even finished being difficult. There's one more black mark that to me is unforgivable. Some platforms will collapse out from under you. There is no visual indication of which these platforms might be. You have to remember them. The first of these occurs 2 seconds into the first level. If you decide to look for a better route rather than blindly go through the first door you see, bloop. You're dead. Start again. 3 of those on Tower 7, and it's 30 minutes of traipsing through levels you've no doubt memorised off by heart to get back to it for another try. And that's the thing. Nebulous, whatever the format, is more a memory test than it is a platform game, and certainly a lot more than it is any kind of shooter platformer. Everything is predictable and scripted, including the paths of those indestructible enemies. Getting through Tower 1, which I just about managed on C64, is just a matter of knowing exactly where to go and when to avoid the indestructible enemies and crumbling platforms. Not a huge problem in a pretty early C64 game, especially as by 1992 it was no doubt a $1.99 budget title. Despite a lot of what I'm saying above, on that basis I don't actually mind the thing too much. It's got a little charm to it, and certainly for the time and system it's technically impressive. The manual makes a big thing of pointing out it runs at 25 frames a second, and the between-level bonus game runs at 50 with parallax scrolling, unheard of in 1987. But it's not 1987. It's 1992. It's not $1.99 or even $7.95. It's 36 actual pounds. And the NES wasn't starved of releases yet. The previous month had seen Micro Machines and Tiny Toon Adventures, both for £1 less. There's no real excuse for this existing as a full-blown NES release. And to prove it, here's what else had been out for almost exactly a year at this point. It's a little unfair. Super Mario Bros. 3, especially in its later SNES refresh, remains an all-time classic, and pushed the NES further than just about anything. But the fact remains that for around the $13.99 special reserve we're charging for Castelian, you could have bought Mario Bros. 3. Or Micro Machines and a copy of the C64 version with your change. As a C64 game, I can understand 7 out of 10. For this, no. Not even then. You should certainly not go looking for a copy now. I ban you from doing so, and while you're living under my roof, you'll obey my rules. On the off chance you are neither of my cats and thus don't live under my roof, and have additionally taken leave of your critical faculties, CEX would charge you between £15 and £35 for this if they had any in stock, which, at the time of talking, they mercifully do not. The Game Boy version, by the exact same people and reviewed at 70% just over the page, can be had for a tenner. It's pretty much identical. So okay, like last week, We completely disagree with the review, in this case by the excellently named Radeon Automatic. Just this time it's in the opposite direction. So what we need to decide is, did Rad mark the game up because he disagrees with me, because he was pressured into it, or because he didn't play the game and wants a quiet life? I think we can eliminate the last one. He clearly knows the game, referencing its former life as Nebulous, and talks about how much he was looking forward to a super smooth console version. He finds most of the faults I experience, talking about unavoidable death syndrome for instance, and the lack of a password system. He's also disappointed it isn't more responsive than the computer version, something which, having played them both back to back, I can absolutely confirm. Here's one more issue I didn't really see. Dodgy collision detection. I don't think it's much worse than anything else I've played from the late 80s, and certainly no worse than the C64 version was, so maybe I'm just not elite gamer enough, or they tweak some issues before release. Crikey, imagine if I'm playing the fixed version. I think it's just he wants to like the game though, and to be fair, he correctly recognises it as more of a puzzle game with action elements. The only other contemporary review I can track down is from Total, whose 71% very much reads like a dodgy one by calling it a frustrating but enjoyable platform climb 'em up. Which, well, let's just say I found adverts for the game in Total and not in Meme Machines. They are not on trial here though. And searching for something to hang on Rad, we find an interesting side note. A second opinion from the editor. He calls it a good game, but basically lists the same flaws as Rad does, with the added bonus of confirming a suspicion of mine that some of the enemies aren't quite spawning in the same places. The reason this is interesting is that editor is Julian Rignall. Julian was responsible for the original Zap review where they went so crazy over the game. And I think this is the solution. Meme Machines as a collective here are being kind to a game they have fond memories of from half a decade earlier, even when an honest evaluation suggests, especially at the price, that it's simply not worth it. Especially when the conversion is both lazy in its enhancements and not 100% faithful to the original. That's not in itself a crime though. They genuinely enjoyed the game while recognising it's a little flawed, and on that basis, Meme Machines, I find you not guilty of all charges on the grounds of diminished responsibility. I order them to undergo a therapy course consisting of playing through Super Mario Bros. 3. Court dismissed.